Well, welcome to another show on Your Story with Melinda, and I've come out of the studio and I'm outside to enjoy the wonderful weather and the hot, hot sun. Well, it's perfect because my guest coming up on the show is David Anderson, a director at A Rocha, a Christian conservation organization that cares for creation, that does scientific research to help salmon fishing and all these kinds of things that for someone like me doesn't really know or access too much. But I'm excited because I'm going to learn about what can I do in an urban center to start caring for creation, to look at a biblical vision of what it means to care for the world and for others. So stay with me. That's next on the show. Well, David Anderson, welcome to Your Story with Melinda. I'm so glad that you have joined me from South Surrey, British Columbia. And I know that as we talked before the show, this is your first time on a podcast.
It is.
Well,
thank you.
Welcome into the world of podcast.
Thank you.
You might love it so much, you might even start your own. Who knows?
It might be a stretch, but I'm happy to be here today.
I hope you're not nervous.
A little bit. That's okay.
No pressure, but I'm so glad that, you're here with me, and I have a lot to learn from you. I know that you're with A Rocha, and it's a lot about Christian conservation and environmental education and all these kinds of words and things. But before we get there, I want to know a bit of your story on how you, someone who is was in church ministry and teaching in biology, outdoor recreation, all of a sudden becomes, this director of the, this Brooksdale Centre in A Rocha. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'm just fascinated about how a person like you ends up where you are today. So let's go back to maybe your childhood, because where does that all come from, this sense of caring for creation and good stewardship? Where does that begin and start with your own family and life as you grew up?
Thank you. That's a great question. I grew up like many folks. My grandfather was a pastor in the Christian and Missionary Alliance, so I grew up in the church that he planted here in South Surrey. And I grew up like many folks. I grew up singing kind of classic hymns, all creatures of our God and King. This is my Father's world. We vacationed a lot in some beautiful, we live in a beautiful area of the country, and Canada is a beautiful country. Like we really value our natural spaces. So I grew up camping with family and, in Alberta and BC and Washington. Later at university, I studied biology, and I think studying biology and having a real love for the outdoors, just in terms of recreational, I think started to foster an increased awareness of how amazing creation is, just its intricacy and beauty, but also I think just through studying and through a greater exposure to science and more travels around the world in different contexts, like I started to see and experience the challenges that creation was facing, the pressures on the systems that are part of this incredible place that we call home. I think the often people, we seem to have this odd incongruency as a people where we really value nature, we value the outdoors, and yet, ecosystems, like the pressure on ecosystems and the continuing kind of degradation of creation seems to just be getting worse and worse often. At least that's what you get exposed to in much media. Mm-hmm. So I sat with this, this incongruency. Like we care. Many of us, and probably most of us, spend significant time outside, and that's a place where we connect really well with others, where we often connect with God. How many of us go for long walks on a beach or at a lake or in a forest? In your context, maybe up in Muskoka or something, and
yes,
and have these wonderful times of prayer, either solo by yourself or with others. But then there's a gap somehow between the appreciation for both the physical beauty and the spiritual component, and actively and understanding how to practically care for it. How do we steward this incredible place that God calls in Genesis, very, very good? And there are challenges. Things aren't very good in a lot of contexts. So yeah, it was kind of this born out of, I think, really born out of like an increasing, growing love of God. Yeah. And as I grew in understanding and love of God and the things that God cares about, I think so too came this desire to steward and care for the things that God cares about.
David, I think that's fascinating because I agree with that gap because, when I need to hear God by the lake, to a Ignatius, center to walk a labyrinth and walk the grounds, go up to the cottage in Muskoka, all those kinds of things. And I think most people in my influence and sphere, that's what we do. So we go in, we enjoy nature. But there is this disconnect because I think that's about all I do. Like I'll recycle. I'll say I care for the environment. I'll do what I can, but not really. You know what I mean? Like I not to the extent of, understanding ecosystems and understanding that, the decisions I make on what I buy or what I do impacts the world. And I think that's the struggle because maybe I don't want to know because it's a lot of work. Or maybe, I don't think it's that I disregard the world that way and don't want to care for it. I do, but I think there is that gap. And maybe you can help me understand that because I think for a lot of us, we're like, we'll leave it to the people at A Rocha, the Davids, right. to do that hard work while we go about our life, right? How do you help us make sense of that? Because I look at the world, beauty and nature, and if you actually ask most people, Christian people, any people, they would say, yeah, absolutely, I connect most with God and my own faith through nature. But I don't think the next question, if you said, but do you actively care for it? I think then that would be not really.
Yeah, no, I very much understand that felt experience because it was very much my own. I mean, I came out of a biology degree, ended up teaching in a Bible college context in an outdoor recreation leadership role where I was teaching a certain amount of science and biology, but more so I was teaching rock climbing and sea kayaking and mountaineering and really investing in young adults, and really enjoyed that experience tremendously. But still at that point in my 20s, I think there was still this element of appreciating the beauty of the outdoors, of creation, seeing the incredible relationships that can be formed and the community that can be built in a lot of those contexts, camping, outdoor experiences. I mean, summer camps are really something that we really value. But the same gap, right? In some ways, recreation is incomplete in the sense that you kind of go out and you have and you take an experience that you value, but it's kind of, I mean, the negative side of that, it can be just kind of just for me, just self-oriented, taking an experience for me and being grateful for that, and that's it. And I started to notice, like in some of my mountaineering routes or some of the hiking routes that I would go on, like as outdoor recreation got more popular, more and more people are doing that, and trail systems start to break down. Forests are starting to be impacted negatively just by the amount of garbage or people being, so again, this breakdown, like people really valuing the experience, but not living or conducting themselves in those places, either in wilderness context or at home in ways that that is more sustainable. Yeah. And it can be, like you said, sometimes I think a lot of us live, I certainly resonate with that, live with this, we're not really sure if we want to know all the impact that we make because it can be kind of daunting. It can be kind of scary. And there's so much fear about environment in media, movies, and we just, we only have a certain threshold for fear. And then I think we insulate ourselves from it. So I would say that's where A Rocha comes in. Like this ministry that we're in. It got started in Portugal back in the early 80s. So we have this unique name, which simply means the rock in Portuguese. Um, but I think it started to meet that, to minister to that gap. Like how can people be inspired from a place of kind of hope and gratitude and wonder, which are all really positive kind of characteristics and values, to care for creation in really practical ways. And when I say care for creation, I mean like all of creation, like people and places, right? Not just the green bits, not just sort of like the Muskoka forest and lakes, but the people, the societies, and the places. And so that's what we do. Really, A Rocha is all about inspiring people to know how to practically care for creation in their particular contexts, whether that is a downtown Toronto high-rise or whether that is like rural Alberta on a cattle ranch or something like that.
So David, in that, I guess I'm just trying to understand, because to me that it sounds, because I mean there are people that can access A Rocha in those areas. But as we look at that, as a Christian, what's our biblical responsibility? What's this biblical vision of how to do this? Because I want to get to some of the great stuff that A Rocha does. Yeah. But from someone who's sort of an average person who goes to church or is in a small group or has been a Christian for a long time or new, wherever we are. Yeah. How do we get to that starting place of saying, okay, you know what, David, you're right. I use nature for my own selfish benefit. And I'll be honest, like it's there for us, but I don't really do something next. But what's the biblical understanding of it? Because, there has been fear about environment for years and years. As a Gen Xer, I grew up in that whole, the issue and debate of it. And, with new stepkids, newly married and having stepkids, how do I teach and inform them? But also in my own sphere, how do I challenge and encourage us, especially from a biblical, standpoint on this care for creation, people and environment as well. Yeah. Like maybe some practical first steps.
Sure. I mean, you'll have to stop me on this because I ended up getting a graduate degree at Regent College in Vancouver, which is a Christian theological school, grad school, mostly trying to grapple with some of these same questions. And so, and then I pastored in a church for 7 years. And so I'm really passionate about the biblical, the foundation that's in the whole biblical story around love of God, care for one another, and care for creation, because it's just woven throughout all of it. So I would just, I mean, we only have a short time, so I would just say in Genesis, like it's really clear, like God made the world to work and called it incredibly good and took great delight in it. And human was called and gifted with this sort of unique relationship amongst all the other creatures, to be stewards. Genesis 2, like we're created in the image of God, and we're to, the words that are used in Genesis 2 are to tend and to keep, like to work the land and to guard it. So there is this reciprocal relationship where the land provides for us, like bountifully, and we're to take great delight in that as an extension of the love of God. And yet we have a role to work and till and take care of it, to even guard it. It can be translated. So there's this reciprocal role, and which I think is the stewardship role. Like a steward, in some classically understood, is someone that doesn't possess or own the resources that they're managing. And that's very much the biblical vision. Like God placed us into this incredible garden, this beautiful earth, to be stewards. Like it is God's, it's not ours, and God delights in it. And yet we're given this incredible power and this incredible gift and responsibility so that it might flourish, and we flourish as well. And that really and while that's unaffected by sin and rebellion in Scripture, But much of the Old Testament story and the prophets, and then coming into the New Testament and Christ coming to earth, that's all about addressing the distrust and the rebellion that sits at the heart of sin. And God's grace and the presence of Christ is to enables us to overcome the power of sin to a significant degree, undo that damage, and work towards flourishing. And that's some of the biblical vision that gets pointed to. Like Paul in Romans 8 talks about the creation groaning and waiting for the children of God, the sons and daughters of God, to be revealed, to take up this task of blessing each other and blessing the earth.
I think that's beautiful. I think that, in the environment and care for creation has always been this sort of separate part of our teaching in the church, or in our understanding of our faith journey, right? Like I don't remember anybody when I was growing up in Sunday school or never talking about that. Like that's, there was a part of our heart and our own living out of our faith, to love our neighbor and those things. But I don't remember, David, ever really hearing about the creation part in my own upbringing, and I think
I would share that as well.
That's been missing as far as that kind of teaching, even as a young child. So I'm hearing all these things later in life, not even really in high school, but I think later in my 20s, as debates raged about the erosion of the earth and different things. I'm like, oh, this is serious, but never understood that. So I think that's important, for the work that you do at A Rocha, and your engagement with people to help start informing and educating people on the importance of that. And it's actually a biblical, I guess, mandate or understanding that we are stewards of the world, right? It's good. And if you're in the city, though, because you're in a beautiful area in South Surrey, British Columbia, and you're living on the land and whatnot, but for someone who's living in urban centers, what's that first start to do something practical? What is something that we can say, okay, I'll go out to, the Muskokas or out in, the beautiful West Coast, because, people from Ontario are always like, oh, the beautiful West Coast. And if you move there, you never come back. I know that because a number of my friends have done that.
Yes.
But in urban centers, what would you say is a good starting place for those, to get involved, even with either a Rocha or just even everyday, practical things they can do?
Yeah. Well, the amazing thing about being involved in caring for creation is that creation is everywhere.
Right.
Right? Whether you're urban or rural, you're still.
Yeah.
It takes different forms. So we're never apart from creation. It's that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So I often would encourage people just to. I had a professor in college that used to say, the problem isn't that we're too materialistic. It's that in some ways we're not materialistic enough. And he was sort of doing this little play on words. He wasn't saying like, as Christians, we should go accumulate more and more and more. That wasn't the point, which is kind of the classic way of understanding materialism. He was simply saying, actually, we have access to so much in the wealthier areas of the world that we've lost a value for material things. We take things for granted. So, I encourage people to start maybe with food. Like food it's direct creation, right? It grew in soil, in a very rich biodiverse ecosystem, which soil is, with hundreds of thousands of organisms. It grew in a particular place on a particular farm or greenhouse by particular people that work really hard in order to grow that food. I know there's a big foodie culture in Toronto, as there is in Vancouver. So we value food in the sense that we really appreciate and enjoy it, and especially in some of these cosmopolitan areas, like just the variety, all the different ethnic backgrounds and contexts for food, which is incredible. So I would start with encouraging people to really value food in the sense of saying grace or saying thanks for our food is a rich part of a lot of people's sort of daily interaction with God and family. It actually can enrich the experience of being thankful and saying grace, to really think through where did this come from? Who grew it? Is it being grown in ways where the earth is being blessed and flourishing? Or is it being grown in ways where there might be either people or places that are being kind of, it's being built on the backs of, it's being grown or produced in ways that is really hard for the earth and creatures, both human and non-human creatures. Now, I don't say that in order to like induce guilt, at all. Like we're really woven into the fabric of A Rocha. Like we really desire to work out this creation care from a place of gratitude and hope. So it's not about guilt. It's just about kind of like an opening awareness of the impacts that we have, and we can have really positive impacts that bless. I mean, we know this from our own personal experience and our interaction with others, right? We can, with the words of our mouth, like we can bless or we can tear down. It's just a matter of if people feel a tug towards this, if they feel God calling them by His Spirit into this area of caring for creation. It's just, I mean, I'm a pastor, so I would say it's opening up our hearts and saying, Lord, what today would you have for me? And if there's an invitation to start valuing things more, maybe just taking that step.
That's good. David, I like that. One of the things that I really love about what A Rocha is doing, along with so many things, I mean, you engage in scientific research, environmental education, conservation projects, sustainable agriculture. I mean, there's so many things that your community does, which is so inspiring. But one of the things that I think is fascinating is a program that you do called the Girls in Action program. And I was shocked by the numbers that came to me where there was a poll done, and 64% of students say bullying is just a natural part of their life at school. 64%, David. I'm like,
it's huge.
That's huge. And what you do where you bring girls from schools into A Rocha and let them be a part of the community. I want you to talk about that because that story of that is incredible. And I think I want to encourage people, to support and get, put some weight behind this program in support of A Rocha. But it also speaks to me that, maybe to get kids off technology, and I say this as a new parent, as this new sort of step mentor parent to Sophie and Nathan, who are 10 and 12, where they're kind of living in this other world on a couch, and yet what you guys are doing is bringing people actually into reality, into a real world. Talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that's fascinating. And then I want to kind of end the show with sort of this takeaway of what that means and what you've learned from seeing these girls within this program, flourish in what you do.
Okay. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, let me just say, technology has its place. So it's not an issue of, caring for environment versus technology. Not at all.
Yeah.
I 20 years ago, if I was outside and I wanted to identify a certain wildflower or a tree that I didn't know, I'd have to haul out this big, thick, natural history book, in the rain, and the pages would be getting soggy, and I'm trying to, Well, now with a waterproof case on my little phone, I have apps on my phone where if I see a wildflower, I can pull it out and pull up hundreds of different wildflowers, compare the pictures and be able to start naming some things in these beautiful areas. And so it can enhance the experience. So all that to say, I think we can be creative and subversive about using technology to get kids outside or to get us outside and actually enjoying experience. So, let's see, Girls in Action. Yeah, I mean, we're really excited about this program, partly because it was actually the Surrey School District, which is the largest school district in BC. It's got 70,000 students, I think, in the municipality. They actually came to us, which as an explicitly Christian organization, to have a public school district approaching us is pretty unique in our experience around here. And I think that speaks to the way in which we conduct ourselves. So this is a program for girls that have been identified as struggling in school, so maybe disengaged from school, and maybe it might be social disengagement, might be scholastic, like struggling in terms of academics, and it has lots of reasons. Like bullying can be a part. It can be sort of language barriers. It can be maybe just some social consciousness that's a bit off or a bit challenged. So these are great girls, mostly sort of 10, 11, and 12. It's a great age to reach them.
Hmm.
And they come out to the site a couple of Saturdays a month, and then on spring break and the first week in the summer. And they come with some mentors and leaders from the school system, as well as some people from the local YMCA. So it's also cooperative. It's school district and YMCA and A Rocha leaders.
Okay.
And 35 or 40 girls will get off the school buses. They get split up into small groups, and we just expose them to creation in a whole variety of ways. We go for forest walks and learn about kind of local forest ecosystems, or we go down to the pond and we do pond dipping and learn about this incredible, this whole world that exists below the surface of the water with hundreds of organisms and creatures. And it's just a delight. You start to see, we realize, those of us that may have grown up being exposed to the outdoors a fair bit. I talked about camping earlier.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say, I mean, most of these kids are coming from inner city schools in North Surrey. I'd say 80% of the kids coming out to our programs literally don't have any regular exposure to nature at all.
Wow.
So we go for a forest walk, and I mean, we're in a suburban area, and they're concerned about bear activity. Well, we're surrounded by housing complexes. We go down to the pond and pull out tadpoles, little Pacific tree frog tadpoles, and they're squealing in kind of delight and fear at the same time at these squirmy little creatures. We'll make food. We'll gather food from the vegetable gardens here as part of our agriculture program. We'll harvest a bunch of vegetables and do cooking classes in the big house here. And they love that. Like, they love the nutrition and the food aspect.
So David, what would you say then? So in seeing that and knowing that and watching this, what would you see as sort of the connection or healing part for these girls for that moment? Because I kind of want to take it into a broader understanding before we finish up the show. What would you say is sort of the learning and takeaway from that?
I think some of these girls are coming, they might be at risk of being bullied, or they might have been identified as being bullies. Mm-hmm. So there's a social dimension that happens in the regular school environment where there's so many kids, so many different ages, and the social pressures to conform to certain stereotypes are really, really strong. Mm-hmm. Bringing them into this atmosphere here and giving all of them in smaller groups an experience that's new for everybody.
Right.
Like, nobody can look cool holding a squiggling tadpole in their hand and getting splashed by water, and everybody kind of giggles and you feel a bit awkward, but it breaks down barriers and enables them to kind of share an experience together that builds community. It builds kind of a cohesiveness.
Yeah.
Singing goofy songs about farming in the main house.
And it levels everybody out. I mean, there's it's an equalizer, right? Like, you sort of equal everybody out to say,
absolutely.
I don't care even what you're wearing or where you've come from, what you're doing, but when you're here in this community and within nature, we're all kind of level and equal in that, right?
Yeah. And God has made the earth to be beautiful. I mean, we understand if we can get out of our own stereotypes that there's incredible beauty in each person because we're created in the image of God. But there's beauty built into the fabric of all of creation. So when the girls are holding or looking at a hummingbird nest, I mean, hummingbirds have been nesting lately here, and you see these tiny nests the size of a golf ball with two chicks, the size of the tip of my pinky. There's this wonder and this awe that they get exposed to that I think it also levels the playing field, and it calls out thanksgiving. And we would call that like praise. We would say we're praising God because this is so good.
It's awesome.
The girls might not use that language, but that's
what it is. Yeah. David, we could talk for a long time on this. And for your first time on a podcast, you did extremely well. I learned a lot. And for you viewers and listeners, Rocha.ca has all the information and the great work that David Anderson and his team are doing. David, thank you so much. I mean, A Rocha has so many incredible, work that you're doing. Thank you for all of us who aren't doing that, but how you're educating and and really changing the way that, people look at, environment and the projects you're doing and practical things that you're doing, with scientific research as well. So incredible. So please thank your team on behalf of myself and others that we're cheering you guys on and doing the great work. But also, I think it's a good challenge for us to kind of go on your website and support the good work that you're doing. I know that you can donate to specific projects you're doing, and it's an easy way to do it. So I want to encourage, our viewers and listeners to go and do that as well. So
thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Appreciate the good work you're doing. Oh, go ahead. One last thought.
I'm just going to point out that there is an A Rocha team in the GTA.
In the Toronto area?
Yeah, there's a team down in Hamilton.
Okay.
They're a small team, but they're growing quickly, and there's great things happening. So there's ways for people to practically get involved out there if they want.
Okay. Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you. And on that note, I think I need to just go outside and enjoy the sunshine that's happening today in our area. So thanks again.
It's raining over here. So it's our behalf as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David Anderson. All the best. God bless you and the great work that you and your team at A Rocha are doing. Wow, what an awesome episode. You know what else would be really awesome? Subscribing to my show. So click that subscribe button on YouTube or search for Your Story with Melinda on your favorite podcasting service to download the show weekly to your mobile device.